thank you and welcome. Welcome to a celebration of the life of Joel Schwartz. Welcome to the Campus Y. My name is Richard Harrell. I'm the director of the Campus Y, UNC's Center for Social Justice. Actually, before I get going, I have in my hands some glasses that someone may have left in the bathroom. Anyone? They're reading glasses? I wish I could see. There we have it. Real, thanks. So again, my name is Richard. I'm the director of the Y. 30 years ago, I was a student of Joel Schwartz. I had the great privilege to take his Poly, I think 57 class, sort of an introduction to Sovietology. And then I got hooked and took the Race and Poverty and Politics class. And I was in a group that was starting something called APPLES, allowing people to plan learning experiences in service, which is the Service Learning Center of UNC, which he incubated out of the Center for Teaching and Learning, now the Center for, I think, Faculty Excellence. Clearly there was a thread in there where Joel was empowering students, welcoming students, engaging with students. He had an incredible memory for all of our names, which I thought was uncanny until I saw that he took Polaroids of us and had them on his wall in his office. So he was working on it all the time, but he made it look effortless. Let me just say that it feels very fitting to have this celebration, this event, in a place like the Campus Y, a building or a center for student social justice that Governor Terry Sanford called the conscience of the university. It's been a progressive, student-run center for 159 years. A place that has fostered leaders or acquired them or networked with everyone from Frank Porter Graham, Bill and Ida Friday. Ida was on our board for 30 plus years. David Price, a congressman. People who came looking to engage with difficult, thorny issues came to the Campus Y to organize around them and to drive social change in the community and in many ways to shape the reputation of our university. The speaker band ran through, the anti-speaker band organizing ran through the Campus Y. The cafeteria workers strike of 69-70 winter ran through the Campus Y. The apartheid protest against the Board of Trustees. These were all things that were student-led, student-run, and someone like Joel was intersecting with these students, inspiring them and engaging with them. He was also a friend, an incredible guy. And I'd just like to say that because of a place like the Y and faculty like Joel, I think that helps to define what was the reputation of this university as a very inclusive, progressive, diverse, pluralistic university, and what was emerging as a New South. And he came through here, he came to UNC in '65 at a moment when all of that was in flux, and he had his fingerprints all over that. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to David, his son, to walk through the program with you.
Thank you. Thank all of you for coming. First, I want to, on behalf of my mother Myrna and my brother Ray and myself, acknowledge the people who helped make this event possible. Jonas Roulette got the ball rolling last fall by reminding me that I had said there was going to be a memorial service and maybe we ought to get started planning it. And he put me in touch with Richard, who generously offered the resources of the Campus Y and offered to host the event. And then Aaron Reichs of the Campus Y and Brandy Davis of the university's development office and Susanna Smoot-Campbell, UNC alumna, they did much of the heavy lifting. So thank you to all of you. My father had a great effect on a great many people over the course of his career at UNC, but also UNC affected him. And because he chose to come here at the time that he did, in the mid-60s, I think his life unfolded in a way, unfolded differently than it might have if he had remained up north and had taken the other position that he was offered at the time, which was at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And in 2006, I recorded an interview with him, and I asked him what his impressions were of Chapel Hill when he arrived. And you should know that he arrived here as a 28-year-old, newly minted political scientist, and he had lived abroad in Russia and in Israel, but he had never been south of the Mason-Dixon line, which in some respects was even more of a foreign country than the places that he had been. So I just want to start by playing a brief 6-minute excerpt of that interview. And then we'll hear from a number of his friends and former students, colleagues. One person who was actually there during the events that my father was just describing is his longtime family friend, David Keel.
So I could be Joel's oldest student here. I'd be very proud of that if I am. But I did come around the time that he came, and I was in his political socialization class, Soviet socialization class. And as you've just heard, Joel, I mean, what's the word that comes to mind? For me, it was articulate. When I first met Joel, and when I was first sat in his class, I was stunned by his articulateness, which you just heard. Right. I think you ask him one question and then 7 minutes of wonderful storytelling and passionate advocacy and strong values. And I think that clip that you played says something about who he was and what he cared about. He once told me that he came from a very tough neighborhood in Boston, and that when the Jewish kids would go into the Italian neighborhood, they'd get beat up, or if they went into the Irish neighborhood, they'd get beat up, and then they would pay the compliment to the Irish kids or the Italian kids who came to their neighborhood. And I think maybe from that experiences and other experiences, he kind of figured out the world he did not want to have or have to live in. And I think his teaching and his work and his life exemplified these kinds of ideals and a commitment to social justice. And he expressed that as a teacher. And one of the few, there's some great teachers in the room. My friend Lou Lipsitz, who was here with Joel, and Peter Fairlene, and others. There have always been some faculty members at Carolina who believed that teaching was the most important thing. And Joel was one of those people. And he devoted himself to making Carolina a place where good teaching would occur. And so he was an innovator, created the Center for Teaching and Learning. As you heard, Apple's program, new courses on race, policy, and politics, things for which he was not rewarded in the university system. He was respected by many, many people, but this is not the way you got ahead in the university. But he went his own way, and we're so much the better for it. And he inspired students, and so and people would come back to see him. And I was fortunate to live across the street from Joel in later years. And so when Eric Clay, who was a student activist in many of the events that he occurred, who then went on to become a federal judge in Michigan, he would come back. He would always visit Joel. I'd get to have dinner with him. Or Taylor Branch, who wrote the biography of Martin Luther King, admired Joel and stayed in touch until when Taylor came back. Would come over to see Joel, and I would get to visit with him. So he was someone who really inspired people. People wanted to stay in touch with him because he was a touchstone of value for them. And of course, Paul Wellstone, the late senator, and his family were very close to Joel and Myrna. And I just think it's an example of the kind of values that he embodied, that he walked, he lived, he talked, and he drew people to him who shared those values. And I was very privileged to be one of the people who got to know him and live across the street from him and spend time with him. I wish now I spent more time, but I'm grateful for the time I had.
Thank you, David. Can I call up Ron and Karen Roulette?
Thank you, David. I was kind of amused walking up here because the last meeting that I attended, I managed to fall flat on my face in front of 60 people. I'm still scarred, so I consider this a success getting up here without falling. I'm Karen Roulette, and about 47 years ago, I walked into race, poverty, and politics, taught by somebody, I had no idea who that was, named Joel Schwartz. And it was, to me, a real awakening. We had been in the States for about 2 years, and one of those years was in Salt Lake City. I was here attending the School of Social Work. But I was really a newbie when it came to this country, or what they call somebody from off, where we live now, up in the mountains. That is the difference between being a been here, which is 7 generations in the ground, and come heres, which is between that and people like me, who come from far away. So Joel really helped me understand something about this country that I was struggling with. I couldn't understand. It just didn't come out right, no matter how I thought about it. And his way of being not only incredibly articulate and very knowledgeable, he was also so inclusive and so embracing of the students, which meant that we spent a lot of time talking after class. And probably as much that I learned in those conversations as I did in class. So then it turned out that we were all moving to Ridgefield Road within a week of each other. So we ended up helping each other moving, and we found a lot of commonality in our past, hopes for our future, and ambitions career-wise. That was a great neighborhood. David and Ray and our 3 kids were, free-range kids in that neighborhood, like most kids were in those. It was great. They were just as likely to have lunch at Myrna's and Joel as his kids were to be in our place. And if they only got in at night, by the time it got dark, nobody bothered. And the parents had great relationships. Wonderful way to create a lifelong relationship. I guess the second instance of my wanting to thank Joel for his role in our children's lives was when our 16-year-old daughter was in Israel working on a kibbutz at the same time that the Schwartzes were there for a sabbatical. And Joel and Myrna shared their wisdom about dating with her and the danger of dating people who may not have been first choice of the parents. So I'm really grateful that they did that. And then our 2 sons were in Chapel Hill, and I think Myrna and Joel kept their eyes on that as well. So I would like to know how many of you were in race, poverty, and politics? Look at that. That is great. And I think that one of the best ways that we can honor Joel is to continue what he taught. And it was about equity, it was about equality, it was about social justice and kindness. For that, I'm thankful.
I'm Ron Roulette. Joel was my best friend for 47 years. As my wife said, we moved to the same street within a week of each other. Actually, we came to Chapel Hill in 1965, the same year that Joel did, but we were only here for the summer and we never met him at that time. got to know him in 1971 when we moved here. She went to the School of Public Health. I went to the School of I went to the School of Public Health. She went to the School of Social Work. We lived on the same block, and we spent a great deal of time together. But what I want to tell you is that I traveled with Joel. My wife is Swedish. I lived in Sweden for a while, and he wanted to see Sweden. So I said, okay, you and I will go. And we did. That was about 10 years ago. Joel was still walking at that time. This might have been his last walking, because we spent 6 hours in Stockholm just walking from place to place to place. And then we ended up on the Norwegian coast, and we took a coastal ferry down for 5 days and nights. And both Joel and I have had wives that looked at our diets. Every time we picked up a fork, they were looking to see what it was we were going to put in our mouth. Well, Joel and I were away from our wives, and we ate everything in sight. And I used to say, Joel got on that boat with me with a stomach about the size of a volleyball. By the time he got off the boat, it was the size of a basketball. Anyway, we had a wonderful, wonderful time together. And I dearly, dearly miss Joel, even though we left here, Chapel Hill, in 1975, so we were only together for about 4 years. We moved to Anderson, South Carolina. He followed us for visits. We then moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. He followed us for visits. We then moved to Greenville, South Carolina. He followed us for visits. And finally, we ended up in a little nowhere place in the mountains called Silo. Some of you may have known about Silo because they have a camp that many young people from Chapel Hill went to. Joel was not in good health the last time he visited us, and he fell down the stairs at our house, so we had to take him to our little 25-bed hospital over in Spruce Pine. And he told me afterwards that was the best hospital experience he ever had. He said the nurses were so considerate, and he loved the nurses there, so he could not get over that. But that's about all I want to say at this point. I have him in my heart, as I'm sure many of you do, and I want to thank you all for coming here too. Thanks.
Susanna Smoot-Campbell.
I am the class of 1997 from UNC, and I had the privilege of having Dr. Schwartz, who I still cannot call Joel, first as a professor, and then I had the wonderful experience of being his TA for like about a year and a half after that, and working with him on the Apples program and specifically on race, poverty, and politics in the United States. We also worked on Carolina Summer together, and I really started out as his student, and while over time we became friends, it was very reverential and starry-eyed on my part. So, whoa, sorry about that. I wanted to share 2 stories about that class and why it was so meaningful, because some of the people in this room never got the privilege of taking it. And a lot of it had to do, yes, with his ability to orate, which you've heard was incredible. But he did a lot of teaching by doing. and asking people to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So two of the exercises, one of them was to take students out and show them public housing in one of the most liberal cities in the South. Show them public housing here in Chapel Hill. And let them draw their own conclusions. And you would look at a map and you would see public housing and be like, oh my gosh, this housing complex is right next to these wonderfully expensive homes. And you would go to it and you would talk about how integrated it would be. You would go to it and you'd realize that the complex was on the road level and there would be a cliff, and at the top of the cliff would be the $1 million homes. And so there was a physical barrier to the way that it was laid out. There's a physical barrier in what was meant to be an integrated, more equal, more inclusive movement. And so his point was, look at it and see the truth. Don't look at it in theory, do the work. The second one that had to do with doing the work was one of my favorite ones that we would ask students to do. And we would ask them to live on the amount of money that somebody on food stamps would live on for 1 week, just 1 week, just try it for a week. And I will confess, I can never do it. I'm not petite, and I like to eat, and it was very difficult for me. I usually would get to day 5 or 5.5, and then I would run out of money. But we had 2 students who made it, one who made it for real, and one who I'll tell you about. The one who made it for real was a Filipino immigrant. She not only finished the week, but she finished it with money left over. And she said, I was able to feel full. I was able to eat rice and peppers and occasionally a little bit of chicken, but that's pretty much, beans, that's what I eat. And I had money left over. And I used that money because my husband and my daughter were unable to do it with me. They're American, and they just couldn't survive on that. I can't let them eat that. That's not enough for them. And she was the only student, actually, that he'd had in years who was able to fully and truly complete it. And then the second student was hilarious because he would have these impassioned discussions in class, and God bless him, but he would say that, about social justice and everything. And he does this exercise, and he comes in, and he's like, I made it. I did it 7 days. And we start asking him questions, and it turns out that his roommate's parents were in town the whole week. And he was going to dinner every night with this kid's parents. And then it also turns out that his parents were members of the Chapel Hill Country Club, and they had a food allowance. And he was going there, and so we kept probing him, and it turned out that, basically this kid had not done the work. And Dr. Schwartz never called him on it. He just said, he said, well, do you think that some of the people on food stamps have friends with parents who take them to dinner every night? And he's like, well, I guess not. And then he said, his hands go behind his back. He's like, and do you think that people on food stamps have parents who are members of the Chapel Hill Country Club with a food allowance? And he's like, I guess not. And then Dr. Schwartz didn't say anything. He said, well, I guess I didn't really do it for the week then. And it was an epiphany that the student had in class that he hadn't really done it. And he had been so proud of himself, and he thought about it. He's like, I guess I really wouldn't have made it past day 2. And that was actually one of the best exercises to take students through, was ask them to really walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So similar to Karin, that's what I take from him, is when you are passionate about refugees and immigration, open your home, which he did. And when you're passionate about social justice issues, show people that. Take your kids to see it. Volunteer with them. That's the kind of thing that I think he gave to me and to many of you, and I'm very privileged to be here with him and with you. So that's all. Thank you. I tried.
Well, Alan Young and I met during our freshman year at Carolina, and we've been close friends ever since. And he started off as a student of my father, but then became a close friend as well.
Somewhat like Susanna, when I first met Joel, he was Dr. Schwartz, and Myrna was Mrs. Schwartz. I met David freshman year, and we became friends, and soon after, I met Dr. Schwartz and Mrs. Schwartz. And my initial memories of those times in college about the two of you are mostly general, sort of a sense of warmth, a sense of friendliness and welcome toward me, because I was way far away from home. I'm from Burlington. And I remember the lake. How many of you have been to the lake? It's like, wow. So mostly really warm general memories from then. And but there are a couple of memories that stand out from, I took the Soviet class, and those of you who've been in class with Dr. Schwartz know how at home he is in the classroom, how alive he came, and so at ease. And it was so wonderful in a class of 50 people that he would make it seem intimate. And he would do, there's certain gestures that I think Ray and David inherited, and you got one of them, but certain I can't quite do them now, but certain, if they get up here, maybe we'll see them. But I remember a vivid moment from that class was at the end of the semester. Dr. Schwartz scheduled 2 days that we could take the exam. We could take it on a Friday or a Tuesday or something like that. And on that Friday, a student walked into that class who wasn't a student, and he stole the exam and just walked out. And I remember seeing Dr. Schwartz after, both one-on-one and also in front of the class. And it really struck me how heartbroken he was. He was so disappointed that would happen. And he stood in front of us teary-eyed. And I think of it now as one of the times, maybe one of the first times, that someone of my father's generation was so vulnerable in front of a group of people. After college, I stayed in Chapel Hill. David was here for a while and then moved, and I saw Dr. and Mrs. Schwartz fairly often. They treated me much like I was family. They invited me to dinners with Taylor Branch and Paul Wellstone, and I felt like I had the run of the lake. I would show up there with whoever I was dating at the time like it was my lake. It was like my country club. And they were always welcome. And about, I remember at one point, I don't know when it was, at some point, Dr. Schwartz said to me, "Alan, call me Joel." And I couldn't. And Mrs. Schwartz said, "Call me Myrna." And this went on for years, and for decades. And at some point, I think I started maybe doing it a little bit, but I think it was kind of a back and forth. And it took me a while. And then about 5 years ago, Joel and I began to have regular lunches together. And, up until, I would say, very early on, Joel and Myrna were David's parents, and as I became friends with Ray, they were Ray's parents. And so they were my friends, but there was a type of friendship. They were parents of friends, that type of friend. But then I began to see more of Joel and Myrna the last 4 or 5 years. Joel and I would have lunch pretty regularly. And there was something really wonderful and healing about it, to be with someone who was like my father's age, but not my father, and how open he was. And he was never not open in general, but there was not much pretense. But one-on-one, the memories he shared, the pride in his family, the worry about family, but the real joy and pride in his children and his grandchildren, his childhood, and some of the things that were mentioned earlier by Ron, the disappointments, but the many satisfactions. And then from my part, being able to, with someone who was my father's age but not my father, really be myself and feel appreciated, validated, comfortable, that no matter what I said, he was accepting. And so, as many of you know, during the last years, Joel was often in pain, not well. And we would talk about that. And for a long time, I didn't think Joel had long to live. For years, I thought, okay, this is it. And he was strong. He was tough. And he just kept going. And so by the time David called me to tell me he'd passed away, I think I'd come to believe emotionally that he was never going to die. And so it surprised me what a shock it was when David called me. And it also surprised me how I just broke down. And I had this realization that he wasn't just Ray and David's parent. He had become my friend. He had become Joel.
Paul Posner graduated from UNC in 1984, and then came back and attended graduate school here in political science, and has been a close family friend throughout all that time.
Yes, close family friend, and actually, though David is my best friend, I met Joel before I met David, and I met Joel when I was a freshman, and I was having lunch over at a now defunct fraternity. They were recruiting me. It was a Jewish fraternity, and they were trying to recruit. Actually, they didn't realize that I was Jewish. They were recruiting my roommate, and it was a package deal. So they thought I was the non-Jew. So, but Joe was he was having lunch. He was the faculty advisor for the fraternity, and he was holding forth. There were a group of guys that were sitting around him at this table, and I was really fascinated to see the way in which he spoke to them. They were clearly sort of starry-eyed, listening to him. But the thing that was striking is that they felt very at ease, just the way in which Alan was describing. They were respectful of him, but they felt completely comfortable with him. He was open. There was no pretense. There was no condescension. There was no status. He was not attempting to demonstrate that he was above them, but rather that he was just there listening to them and validating them. And certainly that was the experience that I've had. And I would say that my experience is a little different from most of the folks that have spoken today, in that Joel was not only my professor, he was not only my friend, but he was also a surrogate father to me. He helped me out in so many ways during my life. It's hard to recount, but just as a way of illustrating that, Joel's signature is on my undergraduate honors thesis. his signature is on my ketubah, my wedding license with Myrna's. His signature is on my son's bar mitzvah certificate. So he's been a part of my life all through those various stages. And David and I don't know that we've shared this with anybody else, but because my wife didn't even know it when I was telling her before I left to come down, we have a nickname for Joel. We call Joel Super Joel. And I can give you an example as to why we call Joel Super Joel. I had a very difficult time getting through college. I worked my way through, and so I took some time off. But Joel was very influential in helping me decide that I wanted to go into academia, that I wanted to become a professor in political science, no less. He wrote me a recommendation, and I got into various schools, and I was going to the University of Michigan, which at the time was a very well-respected PhD program in political science. But over the summer, and I was living in New York and working for a law firm, and over the summer I received a notice that they were raising the tuition and it was going to be expensive, and I had a lot of trepidation just having struggled through undergraduate. So I called Joel and I said, Joel, I really appreciate all of you, and Professor Schwartz. No, I did not call him Joel at that time. I went through the very same experience that Alan described. Professor Schwartz, I really appreciate all of your help for supporting me and helping me get into graduate school, but I've decided that I'm not going to do it because I just don't want to deal with the financial insecurity. And he said, well, let me see about getting you into the program at UNC. Now, this was in June or July. It was well past the admissions time and so forth. So he spoke to the director of graduate studies, and they wanted to know what my GRE scores were, but they assumed that if I got into the University of Michigan and I was an honors graduate here, that it was okay. So they accepted me. I didn't even fill out an application. I never applied. They just accepted me. And they sent me the application after they told me that I was accepted. But it gets even better, because then after that, somebody contacted him, an alumnus who needed somebody to help take care of his father, was looking for somebody who could help do that, and would offer free room and board and plus a salary and the use of a car and all this. And so it happened that this person's son worked half a block from where I did in New York, and so I went and met with him during my lunch hour, and they offered me the job. So I had been accepted into graduate school, and I had a job with funding. All of that happened within 48 hours, okay? And all because of Joel. So he was definitely Super Joel. But I think that over time, he became Joel, my friend, and not even Joel, the father of my friend, but Joel, my friend, and somebody who supported me throughout my life. So it was very traumatic for me that he died. Though I agree with Alan that it was it's amazing that he kept going as long as he did. His fortitude and his will to continue was remarkable, because he was in pain for so many years, and he didn't complain. Right? He just carried on with his life and did what he thought was important. And I'm a professor now, and as a professor, I've tried to emulate Joel as well as I can, and in that regard, I think of Joel as somebody who dispensed knowledge, but not knowledge just in the terms of information. It wasn't about getting factual information. It was about helping you to understand what is important in life, and when you understand, based on that knowledge, to take appropriate action. So this is wisdom. It's not just knowledge. It's not about earning your credentials as a well-thought-of academic, publishing another journal article or another book, getting accolades among your peers. Rather, it's about tikkun olam, changing the world, making it a better place. And so, though Joel is no longer with us, he's still here, and I carry that with me, and I hope that all of you do too. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite anybody else who would like to share share some thoughts or memories.
When I moved to Chapel Hill to get my graduate degree in the psychometric lab across the street in Davy Hall. And another Israeli student, or at that time graduating student, Yossi Ochberg, who became a famous biostatistician later. Yossi told me one day, let me introduce you to some friends of mine who over the year that we've been here in Chapel Hill have adopted us. And we went and introduced me to Joel and Myrna, and I didn't recognize them. But at that point, when Yossi was leaving and I just arrived, they adopted me and later my family, Gila, my wife, and our kids, to be their adopted kids for the rest of our lives. And Joel and Myrna have been a presence in our life every single day since that time. And I could go on through a long, long list of events in our life, and I think of Joel and Myrna being there. Like, I think he saved my marriage because he insisted on teaching Gila to drive rather than having me teach her how to drive. Speaking of wedding, Joel and Myrna were 2 of the 4 people who were present at our wedding ceremony at the Magistrate of the Peace on Rosemary Street. And when our daughter was born here in Chapel Hill, I think that they were the first people outside of the family who were there to see her. When they went to Israel and they, on sabbatical, they visited and became friends with my parents and Gila's parents. And many years later, our son, Tom, was an undergraduate at Carolina. He took Joel's class, of course, and he learned, just like we did over the year, to appreciate all the advice and the good thing that you could get from Joel and Myrna. At some point, we got so smart that in order to get Tommy to do certain things, we knew that we had to do is call Joel and Myrna and tell them which direction, what to tell Tommy, which classes to take, what things to do, and so on. And just as other people have mentioned, our career took us all over the place, so we moved from here back to Haifa, and then for many years, University of Illinois in Champaign, and now in New York. Everywhere we've been, we've always been in touch with Joel and Myrna. Joel would always call once or twice a year around Passover or Rosh Hashanah, and to tell us news about everyone, and wanted to hear about everyone. And on the plane, we were trying to think of all these events, and the list of all these times where Joel and Myrna were with us and helped us. It's too long to even mention. I didn't mention that whenever our car broke down, and it was very often, we always knew that all we have to do is to give a call to Joel and Myrna and get one of their cars and so on. But I cannot enumerate all these events, but the common theme that was really run through every single one of them is how much warmth, care, and really willingness to give without ever expecting anything but your happiness in return. That was something that happened that really colors everything I think about them. And if I'm thinking of a way in which you learn by looking at people and learning what it means to give from all your heart, I think Joel and Myrna are the perfect example. And I'm very, very grateful that we have been the recipients of their affection and their kindness throughout our life.
Alan requests that when people are speaking, they try to stay kind of over here so he can.
I'm going to continue on the theme that was just touched upon about Joel's incredible generosity and his incredible willingness to help individuals who, for no return whatsoever. I think it was around the 1980s. Myrna, you can correct me if I'm not right, but we had a large influx of Russian Jewish immigrants that came to Chapel Hill. And of course, Joel was Jewish, and Joel knew Russian. So he was the point man for this entire influx. And there's nothing that he didn't and wouldn't do for them, whether they needed an apartment, whether they needed to do something with bureaucracy, whether they needed furniture, whether they needed a car, whatever it was, they knew that they could come to Joel and he would do. And I just can't tell you how many hours he spent working with this community. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone put themselves out to the extent that Joel did. And that was just who he was.
And I'm happy to bring the microphone to you if you would like me to.
Hi, I'm Richard Kramer. I didn't expect to be speaking. I guess we're friends probably longer than anybody else because I was here when Joel came, and Joel and Myrna were maybe my first Jewish friends in Chapel Hill, and we spent a lot of meals together. We lived very close, across the street from the Roulettes. They may or may not remember our being there at the same time. Joel, as probably the only faculty member who's spoken today, I was in sociology, but from the very beginning, Joel was so impressive as the mentor and the teacher of so many students who bragged about, I had a course with Dr. Schwartz. I mean, he was so special as a teacher. And he continued that through his whole career at UNC. He continued that both in the poli-sci department and when he set up the Apples program, his advising that he did in the department and also in the college, in which I had some interaction with him. We overlapped a little bit in that. He was just an impressive person, and the last years were hard on him, and I'm sorry that I didn't spend more time with him, but we had some time together. And, you know, it's a very tough thing because I'm his contemporary, older than he actually, to have to see and be experiencing what we're experiencing today. He was a really wonderful person. I love his family, and thank you.
Joel played a really pivotal role in my life today during a specific period of time. When I graduated from here, Professor Schwartz was my professor, an honors thesis advisor. And I'm Canadian. I just became an American in November. And so I'm sitting here and you know, I'm just having fun in the US and I thought, I need to stay down here for a little while longer. And so Professor Schwartz and I, is there anyone here from INS or ICE? Or, I know we have some HUD representative. We worked on a study visa which enabled me to work for a camera company in Atlanta. So I did that for a year, and then I came back up here and I deferred law school. Joel wrote one of my recommendation letters for law school. David wrote my writing sample for law school, so thank you for that. And at the time, I didn't have a place to live when I came back up here, and Professor Schwartz and Mrs. Schwartz offered their basement. And I came screaming home one day. The car kind of screeched to a stop on their driveway, and I went running in. And as I was running back out, Joel comes out. He's like, "Neil, is everything all right?" I said, "I've got to get to D.C." And he said, "Is ICE after you? Is immigration after you?" And I said, "No, I think I've just made a very big mistake. I think I just broke up with my future wife." So I drove up to D.C. that day. My wife's sitting there. I went to go apologize. And it was that sequence of law school and housing and direction and humor. He always injected humor into everything. I will never forget that. We were married. We had a Justice of the Peace ceremony in 2003, and I was finishing law school here. And in 2004, we wanted to have a big ceremony for family and friends. And we had a lot of family and friends coming down from Toronto, and so the big thing here is a pig picking. And the Schwartzes are Jewish. I didn't put two and two together. And they generously offered their deck at their house and hosted our recital dinner. Joel had a good time, giving me a hard time both before and after. I mean, we talked about this, and he said, Neil, we're Jewish. I said, I'm aware, and you want to have a pig picking at our house. But they were always gracious that way. I'm jealous of all the stories about the lake. The year that I moved in there was water for about 2 weeks, and that was the year they dredged the lake. So it lost a little bit of its allure, but the company and the ability to see the Schwartzes on a daily basis is something that's made an indelible impact on my life and on my family's life. So I thank the whole family, and I miss Joel.
My name is Tanya, and I'm from former Soviet Union. That's why you talk about the immigration, Russian immigration. We came here with my family, my husband, 2 boys, and my mom in 1991. And my brother was already here, and my brother rented the basement from Myrna and Joel house. That's why we met. And we didn't have place to live first because we came earlier than we expected. And Joel and Myrna, I don't know how you do this, like your house. We live in your house, right? You probably have tenants. I don't know how you do it. It was Christmas time. You don't remember? You remember? Yes, and they gave us this house for 2 weeks because we didn't have place to stay. And then another 2 weeks they arranged with another family. That's why we lived there. And then finally we moved to apartment. And Joel arranged, I don't remember the name of this person. I think my husband, my brother, they went to Virginia and brought everything, like furniture, linens and china and everything. We still have something after like so many years. We still have something left from this time when they brought it. That's why we had everything. It was just amazing. And the most amazing thing was when we saw the car, because we didn't have any car in Russia and I could not drive. That's why we came to Myrna and Joel, and it was a big Oldsmobile, looked like a tank. And in Russia at that time, like 1991, this car was just so expensive. It was so fancy. That's why when we saw this car, we just were so happy. And I could not drive, and it was so hard. I always divorced with my husband because I could not drive. I was so scared. And I called Joel, and he said, Tanya, only idiot cannot drive automatic car. And I said, oh my gosh, the next day I just decided I go. And since then I'm driving. And also, when we want to buy a few house, nobody gave us a loan. It was like 4 years when we came, we were both self-employed. And I called Joel and said, Joel, I don't know what to do. We don't have money for down payment, and nobody wants to give us a loan. And he said, okay, I will I'll lend you money for down payment, and also I can be a co-signer for your house. And he gave us the money for down payment, and then he signed the house. And that's why we had our first house, just thanks to Joel. And after, of course, we gave you back the money. And after 5 years, when we could afford to refinance the house, and we did it, I called Joel and said, Joel, today is the happiest day. You're not the owner of this house. Thank you. So I always remember him, like I see him in the street. I still cannot believe that he's not with us. And this family is so wonderful. I mean, people talk about helping others, but I think this is the family who really helps others, not like just talking about this. That's why I'm very thankful that we met you guys. Very thankful. Thank you very much.
I'm Doug Dibbert, and I actually enjoy coming to events at which I don't speak. But it would be selfish not to share 2 or 3 stories that I'm uniquely positioned to share, although I readily concede to David Keel that I am not Joel's oldest student, former student here. I arrived in the fall of 1966, roughly a year after my dad had been killed in Vietnam. And within, I guess, the first year, I heard of this charismatic professor, but I did not yet have him. By the time I finished, I think a third of my poli-sci credits came from courses that Joel taught. The course that he developed in the politics of race and poverty, he told us at the first meeting, I have no credentials with which to teach this, but I've always wanted to do some reading. And I grew up in Roxbury when it was a Jewish ghetto. So we had a lot of reading, and we had a community service requirement. And then at the next to last class, he said, some of you have expressed some concern as to, without credentials, how am I going to grade this class? Well, you're going to come to the last class prepared to share with everyone the grade you're going to give yourself. And I later asked him how that went. He said, well, I had had most of you for other courses, so I knew you were excellent students, but I'd never had a class in which there was as many incompletes. The second story, I was involved in student government, and I was in the class of 1970, and we graduated just after Kent State. Well, in the response to Kent State, there was a gathering of all the UNC system students on the Brickyard on the campus of North Carolina State, from which we marched on the state capitol for a hoped-for meeting with Governor Bob Scott. There was some question as to whether or not he was going to meet with the delegation, right up until the group that arrived, and there were several hundred, if not thousand, who arrived. And Joel and I separately had concerns which we found in advance that we connected about, and that was what might happen once the students arrived on the grounds of the state capitol, particularly if Bob Scott insisted that he was not going to meet with the delegation. So we collaborated and agreed that he was planning to call for a moment of silence in memory of the students who had been killed at Kent State, in hopes that that would calm anything. But that he insisted that I position myself at the electrical outlet in the event that the wrong person or persons got the microphone after him. Happily, I didn't have to pull the plug. The third story is in my current capacity. In the mid-'80s and '90s, there was no question that Joel escorted as an enrichment lecturer more of our alumni tours than any other member of the faculty. And on some of those, as Myrna can share with you because she was almost always with him, it was not a terribly enjoyable experience, not because of the alumni travelers nor the destinations, but he was then beginning to experience some serious back problems. And I would periodically get these wonderful notes from people in their evaluations saying, they never believed that you could actually enjoy a lecture given when the lecturer was resting on his back on a ping pong table on a boat. My final comment is simply to observe in my last leisurely visit with Joel on the lake, with water, my memory of that was how much time he spent sharing how much he was enjoying looking after his grandchildren.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Peter Roybal, and I'm here today with some of my classmates from UNC Study Abroad in London in the fall of '95. So we've got Matt Young, Kevin Gates, Meredith Perry back there. I think we all had quite an amazing experience going with Dr. Schwartz and Myrna. Probably for almost all of us, it was our first time setting foot off of the U.S. soil, and we studied healthcare. And it was a really remarkable experience because I think even though probably Dr. Schwartz, again, I think it speaks to this theme that we've had about how he was so curious and willing to learn about other people's situations and really put himself in other people's shoes. He took us all over town to show us what the British healthcare system was like and to contrast it with the American system, which of course he was very heavily engaged with even at that time. So I think it just opened us not only to a lot of first experiences, but to a whole new way of studying and exploring the world that I know that, because we've all stayed in touch as a class and that we've all taken with us in many different ways through our lives. So we're very, very grateful for the chance to have been part of Dr. Schwartz's incredible life.
Hi, my name is Matt Young. I was at LSC with Peter. Excuse my informal attire. I brought my daughter, who's in the back, Virginia. She's 7. We spent the day this morning around Chapel Hill. But I wanted her to be here because I'll tell you, as I think about my children and I think about the education that I hope they will receive one day, I pray and I hope that my 2 girls and my son will have teachers like Joel. It's already been said, but I'll emphasize that while Joel was an amazing lecturer, he had intellectual horsepower, he had experience, all these things that he can impart to students. He did so in a way that was ultimately effective. He did it in a way that valued other people's opinions, listened, understood, influenced students, ultimately to allow us to be influential in the spheres that we would go into. Joel and I really never agreed on a great deal, quite honestly. I may be one of the more conservative people here. I don't know. I was certainly frequently the most conservative person in my conversations with Joel. But as a North Carolinian, showing up in London, sitting with him on the bus as frequently as I could, I was always trying to sit beside him and to have conversations with him where he tested me, he pushed on me. He did so, though, in a respectful way. He made me better. My ultimate view, he would respect, but he wanted to make sure that it was reasoned, it was thoughtful. He did that with the way in which he reviewed my writing, pushing me to be better. And as a result, and because of the race, poverty, and politics class, he changed who I was, he changed things that I cared about, and he ultimately changed, as I was telling Ray before, he changed the course of my life. I mean, there are things that I care about, I'm involved in, that I would not have cared about, I would not have been involved in if it had not been for Joel. So I'm just very thankful. And I would just say as a challenge to all of us, we need to make sure that there continue to be professors like your husband, Myrna. So thank you for sharing with us.
My name is Fred Hall. I used to work at UNC. And unlike most of the other people here, I don't have a lot of stories about Joel. I didn't really know Joel a lot, but I knew Myrna. So my connection with Joel is mainly through Myrna. And it's said that you're known by the company you keep. So I know Myrna. They kept company for many years. And I know that Joel was a wonderful person. I knew that all along because my areas of interest are also race and poverty, and I knew that those were Joel's areas of interest. And again, interacting with Myrna, I would see her over at the library. She used to work at the undergraduate library, and we would talk about things. Later, we both became grandparents, and we would talk about our grandchildren. But there's also a Christian scripture that says, by their fruits you shall know them. And I also know that Joel was a wonderful person because of his fruits, his children, his grandchildren, and then that fruit called apples, which is the service organization, the service thing that he added. And so it was funny because I run into Myrna nowadays at the library a lot, at the Chapel Hill Public Library. That was the last place where I saw Joel. I saw Joel at the library with Myrna. That was the last time I saw him. And the other day, as I knew that this event was coming, I was in the Chapel Hill Public Library, and the student was sitting there with a computer, and on top of her computer, it had apples. So Joel's fruits are still sprouting. And that's all. I just had to say that. I just had to say because Joel was the kind of person that if you looked in the dictionary, in the Yiddish dictionary, under the word mensch, which means real human being, you'd have to find a picture of Joel.
Would anyone else like to speak? We'd like to invite you now to retire to the courtyard. We're going to dedicate a memorial bench in my father's honor. And please help yourself to food on your way through. My daughter Marina would like to say something.
Hi. So I see that I'm the youngest person who has spoken yet, but I still have something to say. I haven't prepared anything, but I'd just like to say that I'm really thankful for all the love and care and time he spent taking care of me, my sister, my cousin, and just how much he shared with everyone. I loved him, and I always will.
Okay, let's go out into the courtyard.
Before we dedicate the bench, or before we cut the ribbon for the bench, I'd love to just say one more time how much this means to us to be able to have a Joel Schwartz bench in front of the campus Y in this courtyard, which is a very special and powerful place. One of the protected free speech spaces at UNC. I asked the family, do you want it over there facing the old well? And they said no. In typical Joel fashion, he'd rather be looking at the campus Y than looking at the old well. So without further ado, I'd love to ask student co-president Kip Williams, who's our newly elected co-president of the Y, to speak a little bit about this space and what we do here.
Hi everyone. My name is Kip and I am a rising junior at UNC, so I did not have the pleasure of taking one of Dr. Schwartz's classes, but I think as a student I can speak to the legacy that he has built here with Apple Service Learning and the generous gift and time and energy that he put into community empowerment and social justice work. As a student now, I have learned so much more taking what I've learned in the classroom into the community and then bringing what I learned in the community back to the classroom than I ever could sitting in a lecture hall and just listening to a professor talk. And I think that Dr. Schwartz embodied that sort of experiential learning and service learning model that is so important to UNC now, and that You know, even years after he was a professor here, now students are in Apple service learning, and there are students who are in the classroom and in the community and coming back and forth and exchanging ideas and changing the world. And Dr. Schwartz and faculty like him are the reason why that's happening. So we are so appreciative of all of the work that he has done and that your family brings to us. Thank you.
And I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Brandy Davis. I work with the University Development Office. I had the pleasure of working with the Schwartz family and putting the bench here in this space. Would be the person, if you have any questions about how you want to keep Dr. Schwartz's kind of heel print here at UNC continuing, to support important programs like the honors program, the campus-wide, the political science, public policy departments. I'd be happy to help you with that effort. We're also going to let Myrna do the honors. In true Carolina fashion, we do things big around here, so we'll have David and Ray just hold this for you, Myrna, this ceremonial moment. If you need any help, we're all here to watch, no pressure. Yay! Thank you, ma'am. Good job. Thank you. Congratulations. Invite everyone to take photos. Hi. Okay, first time.
So shy.
Let me get close. Got it.
Con la back.
Yep.
Con la back. You want to give me your first? So Pepe, I'll put it behind.
Alright. 1, 2, 3. Got it? Let me do one farther out. 1, 2, 3. David and Ray, you're in it. Whatever you want to.
You want us to be in it or out?
You were in it, standing there. If you're open to it. Yeah. You want to be out? Okay, cool. All right. One more. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Danny on your lap? Danny, go sit on your lap.
Yeah, someone's lap.
So we're just taking these pictures, but I just wanted to say thank you all for taking time. Some of you've traveled far. You know, when someone passes, it's not always planned. So I am grateful that for some of you, this was a chance for you to actually make some peace with an important person in your life. As anyone knows who's had family pass, you know, it's a long and perhaps never-ending process. This has been really helpful for me to hear more about my father's life, particularly here in the university, which was really very much a major part of his story. And I just am very grateful. And I think he would be humbled to see that you all have taken time to know that he impacted you, that he meant something to you. And so just that. Just thank you for taking time out of your day, for coming from as far away as you did, and for making his life as rich, I hope, as he made yours. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodness, Mr. For everything.
All right. 1, 2. Can I? I'm not sure who's name. Thank you so much.
Now, are you
just let you play some, and I would just say,